Hello, everybody. So I haven't taken a political compass test in quite a while. Probably at least 2 years ago was the last time I took one. So I want to go ahead and take one for you now. I haven't really made my mind up if I'm going to kind of breeze through it or, really explain myself for each question. It'll probably end up being a mix of both of those things, depending on the question and how much it piques my interest. So let's go ahead and get started here. If economic globalization is inevitable, it should primarily serve humanity rather than the interests of transnational corporations. Strongly agree with that, obviously. I don't think that requires much of an explanation. They're saying, do you value humanity over transnational corporations? I mean, that's the essence of the question. It's stunning that anybody would not put strongly agree for that. I'd always support my country, whether it was right or wrong. Well, no, I disagree with that because you can support your country by saying it's wrong and it needs to clean up its act and stop making terrible decisions. So, I mean, the question is a little bit weird because it's all in your interpretation of the wording there. So, I mean, I would argue that I am supporting my country by critiquing it when it's wrong. But the wording there is strange. I'd always support my country whether it was right or wrong. I think what they're getting at is if your country does something horrendous, do you say stuff like, doesn't matter, man. When we do something terrible, it's right because we're America. And yeah, that is obviously something that I disagree with. That notion I do not agree with. No one chooses his or her country of birth, so it's foolish to be proud of it. I mean, that one I'm kind of stuck on because I generally agree with it. But at the same time, I'm proud to be American. We've done, a bunch of terrible things, but we've also, done some amazing things. And I think, the Constitution is awesome and freedom of speech is awesome. And Martin Luther King is, one of my heroes, and he's the definition of what it is to be American. And there's a lot of the economic stuff that FDR did with the New Deal. I love that stuff too, and that makes me proud. So I don't know. It's one of those weird questions. No one chooses his or her country of birth, so it's foolish to be proud of it. I mean, I generally agree with that, yes. Even though I am proud of my country in many ways, as well as let down by my country in many ways as well. Our race has many superior qualities compared with other races. I disagree with that. Strongly disagree with that, actually, because there's good stuff and bad stuff. From people of every, race, religion, creed, background, so on and so forth. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. No, not necessarily. Disagree. Military action that defies international law is sometimes justified. Not really. I mean, international law, I'm sure, makes exceptions for cases of self-defense. So, military action that defies international law is sometimes justified. I disagree with that. I mean, maybe you could come up with, a very, very fringe case, but overall, I just generally disagree with that. International law is there for a reason, and we're not above it, and nobody should be above it. And if we all followed it, we'd be in a hell of a lot better place. There is now a worrying fusion of information and entertainment. Okay, so this one puts me in a weird position, because that's me. I am a fusion of information and entertainment. But at the same time, I am kind of worried about the fusion of information and entertainment. Not because I think I'm not doing a good job, but because mixing those two things in general is a problem. And I think it can end up misleading a lot of people. Look at Fox News. I think they're kind of a mix of information and entertainment. And they have a really terrible effect on the country. Look at MSNBC. Look at Rachel Maddow. I think she's a mixture of information and entertainment. And, the Russiagate stuff that she pushed was horrendous. So even though I am a fusion of information and entertainment, I still have to agree with that. There is still a worrying fusion of it. All right, next. Now the economy. People are ultimately divided more by class than by nationality. Yeah, I generally agree with that. You have a lot more in common with somebody of the same class, but in a foreign country, than some like mega wealthy person here who's American. Controlling inflation is more important than controlling unemployment. I mean, I think both of those things are important. I think controlling inflation and controlling unemployment is important. Controlling inflation is more important than controlling unemployment. No, not necessarily. Disagree. I think they're both pretty important, and I don't know exactly how I would prioritize them. Because corporations cannot be trusted to voluntarily protect the environment, they require regulation. Strongly agree. That's just, a fact of reality that's inescapable. From each according to his ability, to each according to his need is fundamentally a good idea. Yeah, no, I generally disagree with that. That's a communist sentiment, and that is not what I believe in. I believe more in social democracy than communism. It's a sad reflection on our society that something as basic as drinking water is now a bottled, branded consumer product. I mean, the only reason I'm going to agree with that is because we have many places in the U.S., including in Flint, where they don't have clean water. So in a situation where there's no clean water, to have others bottling it and selling it and making money off of it does seem wrong. If we had a situation where every place had clean water, then maybe it would be a different scenario and I wouldn't be as bothered by it. But the fact that a lot of the water around the country is dirty and it hasn't been addressed, that leads me to agree on that question. Land shouldn't be a commodity to be bought and sold. No, I disagree with that. As much of a lefty as I am, I don't think all private property or something like land, shouldn't exist. I think that I'm still okay with that. There can be somebody who has too much power and owns too much land and has too much wealth. That's for sure, but in general, I don't think we should abolish like all private property. It is regrettable that many personal fortunes are made by people who simply manipulate money and contribute nothing to their society. Yeah, I kind of agree with that. They're not really contributing anything of substance. Protectionism is sometimes necessary in trade. Strongly agree with that. That's how you look out for the best interests of the people in your country. It's not like globalization and all free trade is good by definition. That would be absurd. The only social responsibility of a company should be to deliver a profit to its shareholders. Well, I disagree with that, obviously, but unfortunately that is the nature of the system. The nature of a capitalist system, that's the incentive structure. The corporation has to look out for profits for its shareholders. Like, that's the sole purpose of it. And so that's why you need government regulation, and you need to kind of rein in the excesses of the system. But yeah, the only social responsibility of a company should be to deliver a profit to its shareholders. It shouldn't be like that, but it is like that, so I disagree. The rich are too highly taxed. That's a good one. Strongly disagree. There actually was that report that came out like 6 months ago that showed for the first time in U.S. history, you had billionaires or just the wealthy. I'm not sure if it was billionaires or just the wealthy. So it's either billionaires or millionaires and billionaires. They pay an effectively lower tax rate than the middle class. So obviously that's ridiculous. Just the fact that the capital gains rate is significantly lower than the income tax rate, that alone is ridiculous. Because capital gains is the money that your money makes. So the money that you make from investments. And, it's only the wealthy, by and large, who are invested in the stock market. So when they sit on their butt all day and their money makes money, they get taxed at a lower rate than you if you work and make, a middle-class income. Those with the ability to pay should have access to higher standards of medical care. Well, I strongly disagree with that because the whole idea is to set up a national single-payer system where everybody gets the same high quality of care. Governments should penalize businesses that mislead the public. Yeah, I agree with that. You can't, lie, commit fraud, whatever. A genuine free market requires restrictions on the ability of predator multinationals to create monopolies. Yeah, I think Matt Stoller would have quite a bit to say about this one. A genuine free market requires restrictions on the ability of predator multinationals to create monopolies. It's an interesting question the way it's phrased because, yes, if you actually do have complete, unfettered, laissez-faire, rugged, individualistic capitalism, then, yeah, you'll probably have monopolies come out of that, and it'll totally, utterly destroy the system and make everything worse. You'll have quality go down and prices go up, and all of the smaller businesses will be obliterated. So you could argue that monopoly power is an outgrowth of a genuine free market. But at the same time, you could argue, well, a free market needs to have basic anti-monopoly rules in order to continue to be a free market. So it's a little bit of a bad question because a lot of it is on your interpretation of genuine free market, on that phrase, on that term. So let's read this one more time. A genuine free market requires restrictions on the ability of predator multinationals to create monopolies. I'm going to agree with that just because, yes, if you want to continue to have a free market, I don't think you can let monopolies exist and obliterate all of the smaller businesses because then it's no longer a free market. Then you have only one game in town, and it would be the monopoly. The freer the market, the freer the people. I generally disagree with that. And it's interesting because what leftists recognize, which a lot of people on the right don't seem to recognize, is that in the same way that people on the right are concerned about the power of government and how we shouldn't let government get too much power and too much control because then they could take away your freedom and your liberty, what people on the left realize is, yeah, but corporations can do the same thing. So it's really weird to be scared of excess government power but not scared of excess corporate power, because corporations function as these small, rigid tyrannies with a very clear hierarchy. Something just happened to my audio there. I don't know what the fuck happened, but one of my headphones went out. Anyway, so since a corporation is effectively like a little tyranny, where you have the owner and then you have the CEO, and they kind of run the show. The owner tells the boss what to do, or the CEO what to do. The manager is a better word for it. The manager what to do, and then the manager kind of controls all the little minions. And in a way, it functions like a dictatorship. Like corporations are mini dictatorships. So to say the freer the market, the freer the people, you're giving too much of a pass to corporations. You could have a free market in a capitalist sense, but still have basically totalitarianism or a dictatorship or a tyranny, because the corporations on their own are very dictatorial in how they function. All right, next page. Abortion, when the woman's life is not threatened, should always be illegal. No, I disagree with that. I'm relatively moderate on the issue of abortion, and what I mean when I say that is I do not support late-term abortion unless it is the life of the mother's threatened, or there's a fatal fetal defect, or there was incest or something. So I understand the right-wing concern about late-term abortion. I just think that they're too rigid and they don't make exceptions for the really extreme cases. And also, just to be clear, like, it's like 90% thereabouts. So this is from the Guttmacher Institute, but it's like 90% of abortions that happen in this country happen before 20 weeks. And, you know, that was my whole thing, too, is that once you get past a certain line where you have the nervous system developed in the fetus, then you have a situation where there's pain. And to me, avoiding that pain, like the pain makes whatever it is that we're doing here either immoral or closer to immoral than if there was no pain. So basically, from week 0 until like week 20 or 23-ish, I think it's 100% the choice of the woman, and the government can really piss off, and they really have no standing to tell the woman what they can or cannot do. But then once you get to that point where like the nervous system is created and there's pain involved, I think that from then on, it's only those fringe cases which make sense. So, like I said, if the life of the mother is threatened, or if there's rape, or if there's incest, or if there's a fatal defect in the fetus and the fetus won't make it anyway, in those situations, abortion's okay. But overall, I do think these days that's a relatively moderate position on abortion, because there are some people who would say, like, no, literally 0 restrictions at all up until like a day before the baby is born. And I just think that's a little too extreme. And I also think that people who believe that haven't really thought about this issue at all in any serious way. So overall, I'm relatively moderate on the issue of abortion, but I do think that this is too extreme. Again, I'll read it one more time. Abortion, when the woman's life is not threatened, should always be illegal. No, I definitely disagree with that. But again, just to be clear, it's something like 90% of abortions that happen in this country happen before like 20 weeks. So in other words, I don't think that's immoral. I don't think that's unethical. I don't think that should be illegal. And I think, like I said, when you're talking about before 20 weeks, there should be like almost no regulation on that, because we're not dealing with, a post-nervous system creation fetus. All authority should be questioned. Yes, generally speaking, I agree that authority should be questioned. There are some examples of legitimate authority. Noam Chomsky always uses the example of like his granddaughter running out into the middle of the street, and he like grabs her arm and pulls her back. He says, like, that's me exerting authority over her. And that's a clear example of legitimate authority. But as a general rule, power and authority and hierarchy has to prove itself. So the burden is on the person who is exerting the power, or the institutions exerting the power, to prove that they should be able to use that power. So generally speaking, yes, question authority. The word all is throwing me off a little bit here, because there are obviously instances of authority that's legitimate, but generally speaking, if you approach life with the mindset of, I'm just going to question more than not, I think that's a good thing. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Yeah, I generally disagree with that. There's the famous Gandhi quote, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. I do think that I have a little bit more of a revenge and retribution streak in me than most lefties, and I do think that there is something that's logical about an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But as a society, I do think we should hopefully strive to be better than that, because I don't think that that's like the peak ideal for humanity. So I generally disagree. Taxpayers should not be expected to prop up any theaters or museums that cannot survive on a commercial basis. That's a tough one. Because I think that, yes, generally art should not be subsidized, because then you could just call anything art and then subsidize it. And I think it's pretty arbitrary for the government to pick winners and losers when it comes to the realm of art. I would rather have, like, people make their mind up and determine what they think is good, what they think is bad, and what deserves to be supported and paid for and what doesn't. You know, what I do, don't take this too literally, but I think it's like a form of an art. So, but I don't think the government should, I don't think taxpayers should, pay me or anybody else who's doing something similar to what I do. So that's a tough one, because then on the other hand, like, are they saying that, I mean, museums, that goes too far. Like, you do want the government to help fund museums. That's a tough one, man, because, like, what are we saying? Are we saying that even, like, music classes and art classes in school are not okay? Because they are, and that makes sense. That's a big part of the human experience, and there should definitely be, like, classes taught around that. Damn, I wish there was an option of, like, neutral. I would pick neutral on this. Taxpayers should not be expected to prop up any theaters or museums that cannot survive on a commercial basis. I gotta put disagree just because they're throwing too many things in there. Like, theaters, museums. I'm really neutral on this, but I'm gonna put disagree because I think they might go just a little bit too far. Like, do theaters in schools count? Like, when you have a play for the school, like, taxpayers shouldn't fund that? It's like, well, that's part of school. That's part of, like, education. So I think that should be paid for. So I don't know. It's just a little too ambiguous. I'm just going to disagree, even though I'm, like, neutral on it, because I do think that the government can go too far in funding the arts. And I definitely think, like, funding the arts takes a back seat to, like, the bread and butter things that the government should do and needs to do, like healthcare, like college, like, a UBI, for example, like infrastructure. But anyway, you could tell I'm a little bit torn on that one. Schools should not make classroom attendance compulsory. I disagree with that. Up to a certain point, it should be compulsory. I kind of agree with how we do it now, where it's like up to a certain point it's compulsory, and then after that you can make your decision. All people have their rights, but it's better for all of us that different sorts of people should keep to their own kind. What? Strongly disagree with that. That's some, like, segregationist sentiment. People should be able to freely, talk to and become friends with whoever they want. Good parents sometimes have to spank their children. No, I disagree with that. Don't, like, commit violence against your kids. I think I was spanked, like, once or twice. My dad, when I, like, pissed him off one time. I don't think it, like, scarred me permanently, because he didn't, like, really hurt me, but it's probably generally a bad thing to do that to kids. I mean, maybe you could find some fringe examples where it didn't lead to terrible outcomes, but I think that if you did, like, some sort of comprehensive study on it, and maybe they have, I don't know, I think that generally that would lead to more problems, where those kids would become maladjusted, and they, at a certain point it's just flat out abuse. You know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't say what my dad did to me was abuse, because it was only, like, once or twice, and it wasn't, like, bad. Like, I wasn't, like, bruised or anything like that, but I do think that at some point it becomes abuse, where if you do it, like, all the time, you're just abusing your kid. You keep hitting your kid. That's not okay. Yeah, so don't do that. I mean, again, I'm sure you could point at fringe examples of somebody being like, well, it happened to me and I'm fine. I mean, I guess I'm literally saying that now too, but it was only once or twice and it wasn't hard, so I don't know if I could compare that to somebody who had it happen like once a week or twice a week or whatever. But I think that generally speaking, the cases where the person turns out okay might be the fringe example, and overall that would hurt a kid's development. And just on principle, like, don't hit anybody, if that makes sense. It's natural for children to keep some secrets from their parents. Yeah, I kind of agree with that, although, I've only been on the I'm the kid side of that equation. I've never been on the, I'm the parent side of that equation, and I reckon that if I was on that side of the equation, I would flip my opinion on it. But yeah, I think that it's healthy to have, an open relationship with your parents where, like, you can talk about anything and you feel like they're a safe zone. But at the same time, like, yeah, you're not going to, like, what are you going to do? The first time you have a sexual experience, you're going to, like, tell your parent? It's like, what? Because when for a lot of people, probably most people, their first sexual experience comes at some point in their teens. And it's like, what are you going to do? You're going to be like 18 or whatever, and then go to tell your mom or dad, like, now let me tell you what we did last night. It's like, no, you're not going to do that. That's just weird. So yeah, it is natural to keep some secrets from your parents. Possessing marijuana for personal use should not be a criminal offense. Strongly agree with that. I don't even need to get into that. That's obvious. You guys have heard me rant on that 1,000 times. The prime function of schooling should be to equip the future generation to find jobs. Yeah, I disagree with that because I also think that education is fruitful in and of itself. Like, if you're reading, whatever, if you're reading about science, if you're reading about philosophy, and you're reading what the various philosophers said, like, that might not have any practical application for you in your commercial life, in your economic life, but it's still a good thing even though, it's not helping you in your commercial life. So I don't think the prime function should be to equip the future generation to find jobs, but I do think that is one of the functions of it. So, but prime is too strong. People with serious inheritable disabilities should not be allowed to reproduce. That would be eugenics, and that would be authoritarianism, so I'm going to disagree. The most important thing for children to learn is to accept discipline. Definitely disagree with that as well. I mean, sometimes discipline is a good thing, but that kind of contradicts the whole, like, question everything thing that we said earlier. Like, either you fall in line and you accept discipline, or you question stuff. You know what I mean? Like, they're contradictory, so you kind of have to pick. And I lean on the side of questioning is better, as a general rule. There are no savage and civilized peoples. There are only different cultures. I think that I'm going to agree with this, and here's why. We're all both savage and civilized. We are all both savage and civilized. And it varies. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not doing like a full cultural relativist argument here, because I actually despise cultural relativism. So there are different degrees, but yeah, we all kind of have a savage side and a civilized side, and I think pretty much all societies have a savage side and a civilized side. Some have evolved more, some have not evolved much at all, but there is both of those things in all of us. And, like, the best example would be, at least if we're talking about the context of our country, like, we love to think that we're, like, the most civilized and we're, like, the most advanced and enlightened, but we're the only country that has dropped nuclear weapons on civilian populations. We just invaded a country in the early 2000s, 2003, Iraq, and killed minimum 200,000 civilians, and we also had torture facilities. We're still bombing at least 6 or 7 countries right now. We still have the death penalty in this country. We have people on the front line fighting a pandemic that are wearing garbage bags because we didn't properly prepare for this situation, and so people's lives are being threatened. Like, I can give you 1,000 examples of us being savage in this country. Our drone war, killing so many civilians, and people here don't even really, like, bat an eyelash. So, those are examples of us being savage. Now, you would hear some people say, well, I mean, come on. We eat with knives and forks, and we care about hygiene, and when I go to work, I wear a nice suit and tie, so isn't that civilized? And it's like, well, yeah, but this is my point. My point is, like, we're both civilized and savage. You know what I mean? Like, you can give 1,000 examples of people in the U.S., people anywhere around the world being civilized, treating people kindly, having some sort of standards and procedures and practices and cultural things that are civilized, but again, also savage. So, again, I think there's a spectrum, and it varies. Like, every country and every culture is somewhere on the spectrum. But yeah, as a general rule, I think we're all a little bit savage and a little bit civilized. So I would agree that there are no savage and civilized peoples. There's just different cultures. But I do hesitate to click agree just because the wording of that strikes me as too relativistic. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to give people the impression that my thoughts are that there's not even a spectrum of civilization, because I do think there's a spectrum of civilization. I do think that you could find, cultures that are more barbaric and more extreme, and it's fair to say that, and it doesn't make you a bigot to say that. You see what I'm saying? So anyway, I digress, but I'll go with agree for that one, even though it's tentative. Those who are able to work and refuse the opportunity should not expect society's support. I kind of disagree with that. Those who are able to work and refuse the opportunity should not expect society's support. No, I mean, sometimes people go through really difficult times, even just mentally. And do I want to tell somebody who's struggling mentally and is able-bodied but doesn't want to work? Do I want to tell that person, like, hey, shut up and get to work? Or do I want to say, you know what, buddy? Here's just a little bit to get by. Here's just a little bit to get by. They would say, the conservatives would say, well, you're incentivizing laziness when you do that. But are you? Because I think that your drive is your drive. That's generally my take on that, is that whatever, as an individual, whatever your, ambitiousness level is, it is what it is. The system around you matters, but I don't think it's as much as conservatives make it out to be. In other words, if we gave people a little bit of support, even if they didn't want to work, but they were able to, do I think that would lead to this gigantic chunk of the country saying, I don't want to work and I'll get by on whatever you want to give me, $500, a week, or whatever, say $1,000 a month, a UBI. Say, here, we'll give you $1,000 a month, and that's just yours, no questions asked. Is that going to lead to, a giant number of people saying, you know what, I'm not going to do anything the rest of my life. I'm just going to sit here and watch reruns of the Golden Girls? I really don't think so. I mean, I think maybe some people would do that, but I think the number would be so small that it's irrelevant. And even if those people decide to do that, I don't really care. And I know that's controversial. But I feel like I can sympathize with people who, okay, they're able to work, but they just don't want to right now. I think there's a number of legitimate reasons for that. Am I being too lenient here? I think a lot of you are going to think I'm being too lenient here. But really, I don't know. That's really how I feel about that. Those who are able to work and refuse the opportunity should not expect society's support. I disagree. I think that as a society, yes, there are going to be a small number of people who are like that, and I really don't care if they get a little allowance or something, if they get a little universal basic income or something. I think that, as a general rule, if we're a civilized society, we should just have this default setting, this floor, and the floor is not so low that it's just vicious and cruel, and it's shut up and get to work no matter what. You see what I'm saying? This is an interesting one. Those who are able to work and refuse the opportunity should not expect society's support. Yeah, I disagree. You can give those people just a little bit of help. Now, I wouldn't go above and beyond. I wouldn't, roll out the red carpet for them and get them a freaking yacht and a pool in the backyard and a mansion. I wouldn't do that. But I would like a little UBI or something, a little allowance, and just say, hey, you know what? You figure out whatever the hell's going on inside your head, and at some point I'm sure you'll get back at it. Because I do. That is what I generally think, that like most people would be like, you know, whatever. They might spend 3, 4, 5 months like that, but then they'll be like, you know what? I got to hop back out there in the real world. So anyway, when you are troubled, it's better not to think about it, but to keep busy with more cheerful things. You know, I actually agree with that. I know that that's not like the PC answer, and that's not what you're supposed to say, but that really is the kind of person I am. Like, when I'm troubled by something, I just like to focus on other things that make me happy and that, you know, get my mind off of it. I'm not the kind of person who's like troubled by something and then I want to dwell on it, or then I want to take like a psychologist or a psychiatrist approach and kind of like psychoanalyze myself and dive into why this is the case. I'm very much, I think this is more of a practical, pragmatic approach where you just kind of get your mind off of whatever the hell it is that's bothering you, and you do that by doing other things that make you happy. That's generally the kind of person I am. Some people would say, oh, but you're just repressing the feelings. I disagree. Because it's not like those things that I would do that make me happy aren't actually making me happy. They are. They're making me happy. So instead of like dwelling on the negative emotions, I'm like, let's do positive stuff. I know that that's not the answer that people expect or like are supposed to give there, but that's how I am. First-generation immigrants can never be fully integrated within their new country. I disagree with that. Of course they can. If they want to be, they can. What's good for the most successful corporations is always ultimately good for all of us. Hilarious. Strongly disagree. No broadcasting institution, however independent its content, should receive public funding. I disagree with that. You know, having something like the BBC or like PBS, they're not like worse than CNN and MSNBC and Fox News and the, you know, those outlets, the non-public outfits. I think that the private outlets are probably worse, generally speaking. All right. How you see the wider society. Our civil liberties are being excessively curbed in the name of counterterrorism. Strongly agree. I think that's just a fact. You know, look at the Patriot Act. Look at what the NSA is doing. I mean, it's just factual to say that. A significant advantage of a one-party state is that it avoids all the arguments that delay progress in a democratic political system. I mean, yes, that is an advantage of a one-party state, but does that outweigh the negative things about it? Hell no. It's like saying, well, yeah, authoritarianism has upsides. Okay, but are those upsides like better than the downsides, or do they make it worth it? And the answer is no, because the downsides of a one-party state, totalitarian state, authoritarian state, are that like you have zero freedom, zero liberty, zero individualism. It's, you know, you just got to kind of fall in line and be a lemming. Significant advantage of a one-party state is that it avoids all the arguments that delay progress in a democratic political system. I'm going to disagree with that because the word advantage is too loose. It's not like an advantage. It is true that one-party states, you know, can just kind of act and they don't get delayed. But it's not necessarily an advantage. It's just like the nature of how they function. Although the electronic age makes official surveillance easier, only wrongdoers need to be worried. Strongly disagree. The hell out of here. Because we already know that, like, Edward Snowden showed this, that they are spying. There were people at the NSA who were spying on their boyfriends and girlfriends, their ex-boyfriends and girlfriends. It was so common that they had, like, a phrase for it. They called it love int. It was short for love intelligence. So it's just ridiculous. The people who run these systems are people, and so they're flawed. And so they're not like perfect robots only seeking justice. So it's absurd what's happened to our civil liberties in this country. The death penalty should be an option for the most serious crimes. The only reason I disagree with that the only reason I disagree with that is because there was a study that found about 4% of the people on death row are innocent. So now, if we had a system where we could guarantee that it was 0% of those people were innocent, then I know this makes me a bad lefty, but I wouldn't really care. I wouldn't lose sleep over it. I wouldn't be upset by it. It would just be, okay, certain crimes, the worst crimes, if you're committing murders all over the place, yeah, you get put to death. And that's not gonna bother me too much. But I have to disagree with it because I know that we kill innocent people, and I can't live with a system that kills innocent people. I just can't do it. And then also, listen, my position generally on violence is that it's only okay in instances of self-defense. That goes for the entire country. Like, that's the only time a war is justified, for defending the nation from imminent danger. But that also goes for people in their personal lives. The only time I think it's justified for you to, swing at somebody's face or whatever is if they're, like, literally about to swing at yours. Then I think your violence is moral. If it's anything other than that, I think it's immoral. So in the case of the death penalty, like, yes, somebody may have done something terrible, but at that point in time, when you're, gonna give them the lethal injection or whatever, they're not a threat at that point in time. The threat is controlled now. There's no more threat. So for us to do violence and have the state do violence, that is not defensive violence. So it would violate my standard of only believing in violence for defensive reasons. You see what I'm saying? So, yeah, I'm not okay with a system that kills innocent people, and our death penalty system kills innocent people, so can't have it, and I gotta go disagree. In a civilized society, one must always have people above to be obeyed and people below to be commanded. No, disagree with that, because I think generally speaking, there is something to the idea of the wisdom of a crowd. It's not always the case, but this is why you see time and time again when you poll people on the specific policy issues, overwhelmingly they take the left position, they take the social democratic position, and I think that they're correct in that. So I think that, leaning in the direction of abiding by the democratic will, that's a good move. I think there are exceptions, which is why we should have a constitution. The whole idea of a constitution is that it's going to take your rights off of the table. So certain things are not debatable. Certain things are not open to the democratic will of the people. You have certain rights that you're born with, and they're not going anywhere. They're set in stone. So we need a constitution, but outside of those constitutional issues, yes, I think almost everything else should be up to, the democratic will of the people. So this idea of, like, we need to have a rigid hierarchy in order for things to function, I don't agree with that. I think there are some instances in which you want leadership and you want a hierarchy, but they're not too common. I think most of the time you want to lean on the side of democratic will. Abstract art that doesn't represent anything shouldn't be considered art at all. That's a tough one because I agree with that, but at the same time, that's just my opinion. So, like, who's to say that if your opinion is that abstract art actually is great and you read into it whatever meaning you want, like, I'm not confident enough to tell you that you're wrong. I would just tell you that I don't consider abstract art to be art. But I'm not saying I'm right about it. I'm just saying that, like, that's how I feel about it. And if you feel the opposite, I'm not going to, like, argue with you on that. You see what I'm saying? But I am going to go with agree just because that's how I feel on it. In criminal justice, punishment should be more important than rehabilitation. I disagree with that, but I do think I'm not like most lefties who would say, like, we should only care about rehabilitation. I actually think there should be some semblance of punishment in some cases for really egregious crimes. But I don't think punishment should be more important than rehabilitation. I think you have to consider and weigh both things, and you have to be intelligent with, how you apply that and to what kind of crimes, what kind of cases. In some cases, I would go complete rehabilitation. In some cases, I would go, maybe half punishment, half rehabilitation. So I think it's a complex issue, but I definitely wouldn't say punishment is more important than rehabilitation. It is a waste of time to try to rehabilitate some criminals. Yeah, I mean, some, yes. It's a waste of time to try to rehabilitate some. Like, if you have somebody who's a compulsive murderer who can't stop, killed 15 people, shows no signs of slowing down, and is killing them in the most gruesome ways imaginable, and, gutting them and then eating their innards. Yeah, certain people, some people, it is a waste of time to try to rehabilitate them. It's just not, you're delusional. You're just hoping that you could have the better outcome, but you're not going to. The business person and the manufacturer are more important than the writer and the artist. It's a tough one. I'm really torn on this one. Because you need the business person and the manufacturer for society to function. You don't really need the writer and the artist. I mean, don't get me wrong. The writer and the artist really enrich living. The writer and the artist make life worth living in many respects. Because it's what is life without beauty and art? It's a terrible, dreary, sad existence. So they're super important, but from a very, very base perspective here, you cannot survive without the manufacturer and without the business person. Although some business people, are if you think of Wall Street and you consider that just a business person, yes, we don't need them at all. But I'm talking about, the person who, the person who has your local grocery store, the people who work at your local grocery store, the hardcore, necessary, essential businesses, just like we have now with the shutdown. There's essential and non-essential. The essential businesses, you literally cannot go without them. That's why they're called essential. The business person and the manufacturer are more important than the writer and the artist. I am going to ultimately, though, go with disagree. And the reason is there are some business people who are unscrupulous and terrible, and we could do without them. And there are even some manufacturers who cut corners and are terrible, and we could do without them too. So, there are good people and there are bad people who are business people, manufacturers, writers, and artists. And because of, that fact, I'm leaning towards disagree. The business person and person and the manufacturer are more important than the writer and the artist. Now I'm rethinking it. I want to go agree. Because, we technically can live without writers and artists. We can. Sorry, writers and artists. Listen, out of those things on screen, I'm more in the artist camp. That's where I fall. If you'd say, where do you fall here, Kyle? Are you a business person, a manufacturer, writer, or an artist? I would say I'm closest to artist of all of those things. And I don't think that what I do is really that essential. I don't. I like it, and I'm happy that you guys like it, but I really think the business person and the manufacturer are more important. And that's the question. It says, are they more important? So I'm going to go with agree. I got to switch it. Sorry, guys. I have to. That's how I feel. And remember, I'm categorizing myself more as an artist than anything else. So if anything, I'm taking a shot at myself here by saying this. A lot of people are going to disagree with me on that, but it's true. We need those people, business people and manufacturers. We don't really need the writer and the artist. It's just nice to have them. Mothers may have careers, but their first duty is to be homemakers. I'll disagree with that because there are plenty of women who don't want to be mothers and want to have careers and don't want to be homemakers. So listen, I do not judge, a homemaker or a mother negatively at all. If you're a homemaker and a mother and you're a stay-at-home mom and you raise the kids and you take care of them, in no way, shape, or form am I judging you or saying that what you do is less important than a businesswoman. But my position is that there are plenty of women who want to be homemakers and mothers, and that's totally fine. And there's plenty of women who just want to be business people, and that's totally fine. And then you have women who, somehow manage to with so much work in front of them, but they somehow manage to be both business people and homemakers. And that's really hard, but there are some women who do it. So, I would say that I disagree on that. You can't just say their first duty is to be a homemaker. That's not necessarily the case. And there is, it might be a small number of cases, but there are like stay-at-home fathers too. So multinational companies are unethically exploiting the plant genetic resources of developing countries. Yeah, I think that's true. In fact, I saw a documentary on that a few years back. Monsanto with like these patent lawsuits against, farmers in other countries. I think in India was in the documentary I saw. Multinational companies are unethically exploiting the plant genetic resources of developing countries. Yeah, I agree. Making peace with the establishment is an important aspect of maturity. I disagree with that. Obviously. I would be undermining my whole existence if I didn't. All right, page 5 of 6. Astrology accurately explains many things. Wrong. There's no evidence of that. You cannot be moral without being religious. Oh, please. Strongly disagree. Again, if I didn't put that, I'd be undermining my whole existence. Charity is better than social security as a means of helping the genuinely disadvantaged. Yeah, strongly disagree with that. There's no way charity is enough. You need to have governments and systems set up to make sure that we can fight back against poverty and homelessness and things of that nature. Look at it right now. With all the charity that exists and with all the government that exists around the world, we still have so many homeless people. If we actually had governments that weren't corrupt and had leaders that prioritized, like ending poverty or ending homelessness, we could definitely do it. It's just a matter of political will. But obviously, charity on its own is not enough. Some people are naturally unlucky. Yeah, I think so. I do believe in the concept of luck. Luck is just, it's random. Some people are lucky, some people are unlucky, some people are both at different times. Yeah, that's a thing, I think. It is important that my child's school instills religious values. Strongly disagree. Separation of church and state for a reason. Sex outside of marriage is usually immoral. I disagree with that. If you have adopted a framework, a worldview where you say for your life that sex outside of marriage is immoral, that's totally fine. Like, I'm not trying to take my secular values and like superimpose them onto others. If you don't agree with my framework on that, that's totally fine for your life. But I'm saying, generally speaking, how do I personally see that? How do I personally see sex outside of marriage? I don't think it's immoral. A same-sex couple in a stable, loving relationship should not be excluded from the possibility of child adoption. Oh, strongly agree. Of course. Anybody who would disagree on that, I think, is pretty sketchy. Pornography depicting consenting adults should be legal for the adult population, of course. File that one under freedom, bro. Sorry, Sagar, if you're watching this. I know he's not, but still. What goes on in a private bedroom between consenting adults is no business of the state. Yeah, of course, strongly agree with that. Get your government out my bedroom. No one can feel naturally homosexual. Strongly disagree with that. Of course they can. In the same way that you feel whatever your sexuality is, I'm straight, and I feel that naturally, so I'm sure that gay people felt that naturally. You could argue, hey, all of our sexuality developed like from a young age through nurture. That's possible. Or it's possible we were just born like pre-wired with whatever our sexuality is. That's possible too. But either way, I don't think you have much of a choice in the matter. And I do think that you naturally feel one way or the other. These days, openness about sex has gone too far. I'm kind of neutral on that. I don't think it's gone... I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that. Sometimes I do think that, like, Hollywood and pop culture is just, like, gratuitously sexual, where I'm just like, that's just silly. Like, what are you doing? There's no reason to do that. But then I also don't agree with, like, the fundamentalist conservatives who, like, really think it's, like, a big issue and it's, like, you know, shows the decline of the nation and stuff. These days, openness about sex has gone too far. I mean, I guess I'll disagree, but with reservations. I would pick neutral if there was the option, because I do think that, like, you know, Hollywood could be, like, unnecessarily sexual for no reason, and it just is, like, silly and tasteless and weird. But yeah, ultimately I wouldn't put myself in the same position as, like, you know, like fundamentalist Christians who think this is, like, the end of the world type issue. All right, let's see where I fall. Here we go, about the political compass. This is what it looks like, just so everybody knows. You got authoritarian left, libertarian left, authoritarian right, and libertarian right. This is the scale. You have economic scale is left to right, and social scale is up and down. You know, you'd see libertarian left, you'd probably have, like, Bernie Sanders over here. Libertarian right, you'd have, like Ron Paul, for example, over here. Authoritarian left, a good example of authoritarian left would be, like, you know, like Stalin or any kind of communist who believes in limiting social freedoms. And authoritarian right, of course, you could go Hitler for authoritarian right, but you don't even have to go that extreme. There are examples of authoritarian right that are not really Nazi-like. I mean, I would argue that to some extent, almost every Republican president in modern U.S. history is on the authoritarian right. Obviously, they're not Hitler, but they're on the authoritarian right, generally speaking. Okay, so, oh, here you go. I don't even need to talk about it. Gandhi, libertarian left, Milton Friedman, Margaret Thatcher, Adolf Hitler, like I said. Although I don't know, I thought Hitler would be way up here. Oh, no, that actually makes sense, because Hitler was, yeah, there were some things that he did with the government when it comes to economics that were not, like, you know, total free market stuff. So it actually does make sense that he's there. And then, like I said, Stalin over here. Anyway, give me my answer, guys. What the hell? Where is my answer? There we go. I do believe it is safe to say I am solidly authoritarian. That's funny. I'm like the least authoritarian that you could be. Well, actually, no. Least authoritarian you could be is like down here. But I am solidly libertarian left. Or left libertarian, however you want to say it. Let's see. I'll give you my exact numbers here. My exact numbers. Economic left, right. So I'm minus 6.13 on the economic scale. So I'm like, again, this is solidly left on economic stuff, although not, you know, there's still room to the left of me, even on economic stuff. There's still room to the left of me. And then my social libertarianism is minus 5.33. So, again, I'm almost equally libertarian on social issues as I am left on economic issues. Again, there is still room to a more libertarian. There are more people who are more libertarian on social issues than me, but I'm pretty solidly almost smack dab in the middle of libertarian leftism here. So yeah, the first time I took this test was a couple years ago, and I thought it was really cool, and I like the spectrum. I like how they did it with the quadrant here. I think it's more accurate than just the left-right scale. And what I've found is, because when I did this last time, I told people to tweet their results to me, and what I found is that the overwhelming majority of the people who listen to my show are libertarian left. But what's interesting is that they're all over the place in the libertarian left scale. Like, there were people all the way down here, there were people over here, they were over here, they were over here, some were right about where I am. But yeah, that was almost everybody who watched my show. Very few were outside of the green here. So, there you go. Economic left, negative 6.13. Social libertarian, negative 5.33. Interesting stuff, man. I really, really like it. They used to have a thing where you could see, you know, who exactly was where you are on the spectrum, but it's fine. It's really not that big a deal. I have a general idea of who's in the same kind of area as me. But anyway, thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you want to take this quiz, I will leave it in the video description box.